Previously, I worked as a project manager. I worked for 8 years in Ericsson and a year and a half in Sony. And in a role of a project manager, it's quite often that you ask questions like, what is it that you're going to develop? That's the first thing you've been told, at least in an R&D project management role, that you need to develop something. So the questions you ask is, what is it that I'm going to develop? Who's going to do this? Which team? Where are they located? When do we finish this? And how do we get there? So these are the questions that you ask as a project manager, trying to achieve a goal, trying to finish a development project, or even services, be what it is. But one question that I thought as a project manager that I wasn't really able to understand was the why. Why do we develop products, and what makes companies develop the products that they do? This is, I think, a very fundamental question that you need to start off with. Whether you're a startup, whether you're a really big company, why do you develop products that you do? And this is something I really wasn't able to understand when I was a project manager, because by the time I got involved, it was quite late. They had already decided, the strategic decision was made as to why the product needs to be developed. So I became a product manager, I think it was a year and a half back, mainly because I needed to understand why it is that a product is being developed. I needed to be there from the beginning. As it turns out, there are a few factors that influence why a product is made. So in order to understand the feasibility of the product, you have influences such as the financial feasibility. You need to know what kind of cost, how much money does the company have, how much can they invest in this. Then you have the company strategy by itself, whether you're a startup, a one-man team, or whether you are a multinational corporation, you need to have a strategy. You need to know what kind of products, what kind of markets that you're going to deliver towards. Then you have your portfolio management. As a product manager, most of you probably have portfolios, manage portfolios, and you need to take into consideration if this product is going to add to your portfolio. Is it going to expand it, or is it going to be a new portfolio that you're going to start up? You have to do a market analysis. What kind of a market is out there? How quickly is it changing? Are you going to address the fringe of the market? Are you going to address the bulk of the market? So a market analysis is quite important. So is a technical feasibility. Whether you have intellectual properties, are you using technology that's already there? So you need to know these things. Finally, your groups, teams, and culture. How you develop the product also depends on the culture in your company. You can see that all these bullets are a topic by themselves. You could delve into this the whole day. It's not something that's easily understood. Something like market analysis you could deep dive into this to understand what sort of analysis you could do with the market. What we are going to talk about today is how do we capture the customer requirements. If you ask most managers today, they would say that gathering customer requirements is not difficult. We can manage that. We need to understand how we need to map these requirements to the products that we are doing. But I think, and this is from my experience, that this is taken for granted today. How you go get requirements. And the reason I put requirements in quotes here is there's no one definition of a requirement. Requirements can be a number of things. When you go meet a customer, when you speak to a customer, be it face-to-face, in a survey, whatever it is, you get inputs. And we're going to talk about that. And all these inputs don't really map into requirements. So before we talk about customer requirements, I want to introduce you to two concepts. Maybe most of you have heard about it, but I hadn't. There's one more slide. So, how many of you think gathering customer requirements is an easy thing? I mean, you've all done this probably a little bit. Is it simple? Yes, no, no. Some of them think it's very easy. I just wanted to give you a quote from, it was from Henry Ford. This quote has been used a lot of times. You probably would have seen it in many presentations. It simply says that if I had asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said they want a faster horse. It's just to highlight that it's really complicated getting requirements from your customers. Most probably, they would give you solutions to their problems. And that is not what you want. You need to be the expert in knowing what the solution needs to be. You need to know what the problem is, but most often than not, they give you the solutions and you come back saying, wow, okay, I know what to do. It's an easy fix. They've already told me what to do, so I can do it. So the first concept I'm going to introduce is called design thinking. Anyone here who's heard of it? Some of you, okay. I didn't know about design thinking before I got introduced to this. So let me read it out. Design thinking is a discipline that uses the designer's sensibility and methods to match people's needs with what is technologically feasible and a viable business strategy, can convert into customer value and market opportunity. It's a lot of buzzwords and keywords. What you need to remember is it uses the designer's sensibility and methods to match people's needs with what is feasible and business strategy. So design thinking, as I understand it, is used for innovation, where historically designers used to be present in the downstream of development. You had the R&D, you had the product made, and then it was given to designers. Can you package this in a nice way? Can you make it look good and give it to the market? Which was okay, it worked in some instances. You know, designers prepped it up, wrapped it in a nice gift wrapper and gave it, and people liked the aesthetics. But in design thinking, the designer comes at a much earlier stage, at the strategy point. So innovation is powered by a thorough understanding through direct observation of what people want and need in their lives, and what they like and dislike about the products that's packaged and marketed. Design thinkers rely on customer insights gained from real-world experience, not just data and market research. So design thinking basically is exploring methodology where you don't go from a problem to a solution. Like, if you think of business thinking, you have a problem and then you go to the solution. But in design thinking, you spend a lot of time in understanding the problem. And then you figure out there are multiple problems. And then you filter them and say, okay, these are the problems we can address. And then you come to solutions. So there are three aspects to design thinking. I don't know if you can see this, but what it states is, in the first circle, it's called desirability. What is it that the market needs? What does the customer desire? Feasibility. What is feasible today, given the technology, given the competence, given the finance situation that you have? And then the viability. What is the business viability? Sorry? What did you say? The viability, the business viability. So is it viable for a business, for a company, is it a viable decision to pursue that? So viability is within your control. It's something that you influence based on whatever criteria that you have. The solution that emerges at the end of the human-centered design should overlap these three levels. So design thinking is a human-centric methodology where empathy empathy plays a very big role. And we will touch upon this later as well. So this is a framework developed for design thinking. I think it was the UK Design Council that came up with this framework. They took design thinking as a concept and they came up with a process framework. It's called the double diamond, if I'm correct. So where you start with the problem and you go to the definition and then to the solution. And you have 4 stages. That's the discover, define, develop, and something I can't read. Something with a D. So what we are going to talk about today is this diamond, so-called diamond. And the discover phase, as you can see, is a divergent phase where you understand the problems, and the problems could be multiple, like we spoke about. This is where you go into asking a lot of questions to not just to address the bulk of the customers in your bell curve, but also to try and understand the extremes, to try and see if there are markets that are not addressed today that you can address. So this is a divergent process, and then you converge to define what product or what is the priorities of the outcomes that you've got from the definition. So you synthesize whatever you've collected as inputs, and then you come up with a requirement specification, if you want to call it. And then they have a iterative methodology of developing that you do prototypes and then get market feedback, and then you reiterate that process. So this was the first concept of design thinking. The second concept that I want to introduce is called outcome-driven approach. Previously, I think during the 80s, most companies were technology-driven. So you had the technology, and you used the technology to come up with a product, and then you sold them. And over 90s, when it changed to something called as customer-driven, where you went to the customer, you said, what do you want? What is it that you really need? And they told you what they want, and you came back and then you developed that. To a certain extent, both of them worked, but still there are gaps on as to how you can really know if your product is going to be successful or not. So one of the concepts that's been introduced is called outcome-driven approach. And what it really means is when you go to a customer and you say, hey, what kind of problems do you face today? I want to know what your problems are, or how can I help you? He gives you a lot of things. He gives you his needs. He gives you wishes, wants, specifications, expectations, solutions, desires, concepts. And those of you who've been to customers or even spoken to them online or whatever it is, collected information, would understand that this is really a lot of things that you need to filter out. How do you get from all these to a requirements that you need to do? If you end up doing each and every thing in your product, it's going to be so complex that nobody is going to buy them, not even the customer. So it's really crucial to know what to filter out in this. What do you really need to develop so that it's viable and it's also feasible? So this approach fundamentally says that first of all, you need to know that literally the voice of the customer does not translate to meaningful inputs. You need to know that everything that the customer needs or says he needs does not transfer into meaningful inputs. And then it talks about 3 aspects of getting requirements. First is jobs. What are jobs? Jobs are what the customer is trying to accomplish. Like if we think of a lawnmower, the job is to mow the lawn. It's pretty simple. It is to cut the grass. But then you look at what are the outcomes. And outcomes are something you define as success metrics. These are metrics that the matrices that the customer uses to define whether the job was done successfully or not. So for example, in the case of the lawnmower, the job is the same to everybody else, but in terms of outcome, each and every customer has a different success criteria. For somebody, it could be how even the grass has been cut. For somebody, it could be how fast it's been cut. For somebody, it's how cheap. So you need to understand what the outcomes are. What is the success criteria that the customer is actually looking at? And it's not a simple thing, because you can't usually go and ask, okay, what's your success criteria? How do you value this? Humans and people usually don't know. They don't know everything. They would probably give you one or two, and that's not really what would complete the picture, but it's difficult to get each and every value that they incorporate, that they use to judge a particular product. And we will touch on how we need to get this information. The third aspect is constraints that they place on a product. It could be budget, it could be cost, it could be time. You need to develop a product based on a certain constraints of your own and some constraints of the customer. So jobs, outcomes, and constraints. This is a huge topic by itself, outcome-driven approach, like Martin mentioned. But I'm just summarizing this really quickly. So these three are really the key points that they talk about. There are a lot of definitions for the kind of jobs. You have functional jobs, you have emotional jobs. Functional jobs are something that just meet the requirement of what is supposed to be done. Then you have emotional jobs of how do you feel when a particular job is done? It's something that's emotional to me, and how do you relate it with social? How does the society look upon you? Like, I don't know, if you buy a lawnmower that's gleamy, that's gold coated, maybe you get your neighbors look at it and you feel, okay, that the value of the product goes up. Maybe the color, the design is important. So there are different kinds of jobs. There are a lot of outcomes that you need to define. So design thinking, outcome-driven approach, and this too has a process framework. I'll just quickly go through it, where you formulate the innovation strategy. You need to have a strategy on what kind of path you're going to take, what kind of products you're going to make. Then you capture customer inputs, identify the opportunities, position your current offerings. You go with segmenting the market, defining the target strategy, position your offerings, prioritize development pipeline, and finally define breakthrough concepts. Today we are going to speak mostly about capturing customer inputs and a little bit maybe of identifying opportunities. So both design thinking and outcome-driven approach basically say that there are three ways you can approach customers to gather requirements. The first one, it says, is to look. What it means is it's very important to look at the customer in their natural habitat, how they use the product. You can ask them any number of questions, but looking at them actually using your product makes a big difference. I can give you an example of when we did this program, and I was visiting some customers in the US, and I saw that one of the customers, we asked him about the problems, we asked him what kind of solutions he needed, and he spoke about a lot of things. But when I saw that we sell a lot of hardware units, and he had this weird circuits and wires connected to the hardware, which none of our other customers had done. And I asked him why he had done that, and he said, I thought that's how you're supposed to do it. I just wanted to switch on the hardware in the morning and switch it off in the night. And since we don't provide a on-off button in our hardware, because that's not the kind of target customers we are looking at, our hardwares are supposed to be switched on once and then used for months, years. They don't switch off. But here was a customer we never thought of, and he didn't even think that's a problem, because he thought we knew as product managers that that was a problem and we had designed this based around it. He just assumed that we knew that that was a problem. So when you go and visit a customer and see their environment, how they use the products, it makes a really big difference. Observe people to discover what they do rather than what they say. Listen with your eyes. Documentation, fly on the wall. Fly on the wall being you just observe, ask them to do, if they have labs or even if it's software products, ask them to do the entire routine rather than just talk about it. And you will see many times that what they do mismatches what they say. Sorry.
Just important, the impact there is also to identify the actual user. So you don't talk to a purchaser, for instance. You really need to talk to the right person who's actually using the product.
Absolutely. I have a point on that, but thanks for bringing it up. What kind of users you address is really important. A customer is not a head office address. You cannot just send your surveys to this address and say, could somebody from this department who use our products give us back the feedback? You wouldn't know anything about who it is who's actually addressing it. You need to know the users. And we'll come up to certain types of users whom you can address and see how they matter. Is there? Yeah. Ask. So one was to observe them. Second is to ask them questions. This is really, you have a lot of points about don't ask leading questions, don't point them towards solutions, don't say, do you mean this? And they would usually say, yeah, because they think you know what the solutions are. Don't give them binary questions. Is it, if not this, is it that? There probably is a gray area that you need to explore. This is a funny one. Why? It's also used in root cause analysis if you have a bug or during project management. It sounds like a annoying kid asking why really, but why? You can't really just keep shooting this at the customer, but you could do it in a tactical way. We tried this with our salesperson before we went to the customer, and he didn't know we were trying it. It was quite successful. It would amaze you as to how effective it is, what kind of results you get from it. So one of the customers, we actually asked them to draw the flow diagram of the process that they work with. And it was really interesting to see that they were a group of 8 people. And one of them, the manager, started drawing the process. And then the architect came in and said, no, it's not like this. Let me show you. And he changed it. And then the developers came in. They said, no, this is not how it works. So it's really amazing to see many companies, and we observe this many times, that they don't know the processes themselves. It really helps not only the customer, but also for you to get an insight as to how things work, how chaotic it could be, what kind of markets you're addressing, that it's not clear-cut. It doesn't go free flow from this to this, that you draw clean boxes on PowerPoints and say, okay, this is how it's going to work. So asking for flow diagrams, flow charts is good. Think out loud protocols. Ask them to say what they're doing when they're doing, because many times they do things which are unconscious, which, because you've been doing it on a daily basis, you wouldn't think that you're actually doing it. So the customers wouldn't know that they're keeping, I don't know, using some weird procedure because they've been doing it for so many years, they just don't think about telling that. So when you ask them to say it out loud, what they're doing it, you get some useful insights. Uh, Hold on, maybe, yeah, one thing that I would also like to mention is you need to know whom you're asking these questions to. You need to know what kind of hierarchy there is in the customers when you go meet customers, or because we've seen that there could be a decision maker who's in the group when you've gone to meet a bunch of customers, and usually it's only him or her who's speaking, and then the rest of them are quiet because, yeah, that's the boss speaking. You need to understand the dynamics of the customer. You need to understand who is present there, what is their role. You need to kind of extract information in a way that is really useful to you. Coming back, when you take notes, you come back and say that, okay, I have this input from the customer. If you know from whom it's coming, then it makes a big difference. If you know that it's coming from the manager who is the decision maker, who has the budget, then you know how to value that note than if it's coming from a developer. Then you could also see who's the influencer in the group. So know your customer. And the third thing these processes emphasize on is to try. This is a bit difficult, at least in the industry that I am in, because we have customers who work in aerospace and defense and automotive, and they don't let us touch the equipment. So living in their shoes was a bit hard, but they did give us some shoes when we went to the factory. So it's record the experience. This was quite important because when we came back, it's quite often that you don't want to really go through the notes immediately. It's kind of boring that you want to sit down and go through what you've written. I don't understand my own handwriting, so it's easier to record an experience. Scenario testing and empathy. Empathy is something that design thinking very much values. It is to live, it's very similar to live in the shoes, understand the customer from their point of view. It is actually to live the life that they live. One customer that I visited manufactures dry walls, gypsum walls, those walls that you build, and the noise transmission between these walls was something that they tested because they had to meet certain standards. It wasn't the most important aspect of developing dry walls. So when we went and met the customer, they said one of the things that they mentioned is it's very difficult for them to convince the management that this is a real problem, that noise passage, noise absorption, or noise passing through the dry walls is a big issue. If we hadn't gone there and spoken to them and seen their labs and seen how difficult it is for them to report this to the management, we wouldn't have come back and said, why don't we make the reports much more management friendly? Which is, they want reds if it's going wrong, they want green if it's going right. That's all they want to see. Why don't we make it really simple? It makes the lives of these engineers, these testers, very easy because they take all the data that we produce and they have to come up with these charts and everything, and then nobody in the management is really interested in those. They just want something that says green or red to go ahead. So you need to empathize with the customer, live in their shoes, see what really are the pain points for you to understand. There's something called as the empathy map. We haven't used it, but I thought this could be quite useful in some circumstances. It's to map what the customer said, what they did, what they thought, and this is something of your intuition because you don't know what they're thinking. It's also based on what kind of position they had, what roles they had, and what did they feel. So you kind of draw a map out of all your outcomes. And once you've gathered your outcomes, what do you do with that? So there are many ways of doing a gap analysis. What we did was quite simple. We asked the customers for the satisfaction they had with the current solutions they had, and then you ask the importance of the need of a particular requirement. So suppose a customer says that you come back with your inputs and you say, okay, these were your needs. What priority do you give to this need? And he says, okay, I think it's 8. I think this is really useful for me, and I think it's 8 that I would score it. And you say, great, so that's quite important for you. You need this quite much. How satisfied are you with the current solution you have? Well, I'm quite satisfied. I would say probably 8. And then you know that, okay, he's not going to buy something just because he needs it, because he's quite satisfied with what he has. Just because a customer needs it doesn't mean you need to develop it. You need to understand how satisfied are they with the current solutions that they have. So if you can do a gap analysis, there are different ways of giving weightages to the priorities and how you convert percentages to points. But simply speaking, you map them out and then you say, okay, there are some opportunities when the need is high and the satisfaction of the current solutions is low, then we know that there's an opportunity here. If the satisfaction is high and the need is high as well, then you know that it's a competitive market. You can still look for some options there. But anything that's low in the user need and in the satisfaction, or anything that's low of what the user does not need, then you probably shouldn't be addressing that unless you have ideas of some disruptive technologies. What was helpful for us when we did this is there were some outcomes which showed that we already had them in the product. Customers kept saying that we need this particular feature, and we realized that, but we already have this. Why don't they know about this? And then we realized the marketing message that we were sending out was not optimum for that particular feature. We didn't really highlight that. So if not, even if you don't get some breakthrough ideas, I think going there, visiting customers, you would at least understand maybe there are some features that you need to market well, which are already there. Maybe there are some features which are already in the pipeline that you have been developing and you need to reprioritize them. Or maybe that gives you some new ideas that you need to develop. Quickly, I jotted down some of my learnings that I thought would be important or useful for you guys if I share. Always involve the sales guys. This is coming from a B2B perspective. We have a lot of salespeople who are responsible for their customers. You need to keep them into confidence because they are the relationship managers. You need to make them understand that this is not a sales pitch that we are going towards, because they would have some expectations that we, coming from headquarters, product managers, are going to show them roadmaps, and that's their opportunity to sell and make some money, but that's not going to be the case. And it's really important for them to understand this, that this is a learning experience, that we need feedback. And it was really interesting because the salespersons that we went out with, they said, we didn't know so much about the customer because you never ask them. You only go there and tell them what you have. This is what we have. This is what is coming in the future. We would like to put it through your mouth. Just stuff it. So don't do that. Get to know your customers. Go prepared. Know the users. Who's the decision maker? Who's the influencer? It's really important when you come back to know who gave you those inputs. Yeah, this is funny because we went we didn't know. We thought that when we go meet the customers, it would be a nice discussion. You know, they would be very friendly and tell us what they need, and they would draw flow diagrams. Yeah, I laughed later as well. They had a lot of issues, current issues with our products, and they they ranted on about what was wrong, and you need to address that. You really need to address that. Get it off the chest. So we set the agenda saying the first 1 hour, let them tell us about the problems that they have. Get done with it, and then let's move on. It's a really hard learning, and yeah, I think
That
it
can add value to the discussion as well, because it might
absolutely,
development points.
absolutely. So uh, yeah, get objective answers. A lot of them like to say, yeah, we need it a little more cheaper. Really, everyone needs it cheaper. We need it faster. Everyone needs it faster. What does it mean? How fast? What is fast? What are the units? What is cheap? So try and get objective answers. Being two persons is better than one. Sometimes one falls asleep, the other one is still awake. Um, Categorize users and their roles. Synthesize the notes as quickly as possible. Like I said, the notes that I took down, I couldn't understand after a month. I don't understand my own handwriting, so record it if you can. Um, there were a couple of points. Before you go to the customer, try and understand the situation of the company, of the group, of the department. It's really important to show that you know a lot about the customer than to go and ask them to start introducing and telling from scratch everything. One of the customers that we visited, we knew that they had layoffs before, so the atmosphere wasn't so clean. So they had a lot of complaints about our current product, but they ended up saying that this is the best product we have. This is the workhorse. It was more for them to get things off their chest because of the background of what was happening in the company. So if you know what's happening, you get a little more empathy. You know how to handle situations better. Yeah. So these were some of my learnings. I have one more slide which I want to show you, which is actually a video clip. One thing that whenever I've tried to tell my team that we need to look at what the customer needs, there's always somebody who says, but look at Apple. They don't care about customers. They developed whatever they wanted. They were the best, and we are the best at doing what we want. The customers will buy it. There's always somebody who thinks that Apple does not care about their customers. And I really wanted to burst that myth that Apple really doesn't care. And the next slide that I show, and since Steve Jobs is going to tell you this, it's the final word. Yeah, this. So I think it's in all employee meeting or something like that. And there's a context to the question that this gentleman asks Steve Jobs, because he's quite angry, and he asks Steve Jobs. It's a developer conference, yeah. So so don't think too much about the question, because you need to watch a lot more videos then. Just listen to the answer. It apparently doesn't work on a Windows machine. So let's try with a Mac.
Here it comes.
Sad and clear that on several counts you just thought you don't know what you're talking about. I would like, for example, for you to express in clear terms how, say, Java in any of its incarnations addresses the idea.
Maybe a little more, won't you?
And when you're finished with that, perhaps you could tell us what you personally have been doing for the last 7 years.
You know, you can please some of the people
some of the time. But one of the hardest things when you're trying to affect change is that people like this gentleman are right in some areas. I'm sure that there are some things OpenDoc does, probably even more that I'm not familiar with, that nothing else out there does. And I'm sure that you can make some demos, maybe a small commercial app that demonstrates those things. The hardest thing is, how does that fit in to a cohesive, larger vision that's going to allow you to sell $8 billion, $10 billion of product a year? And one of the things I've always found is that you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. You can't start with the technology and try to figure out where you're going to try to sell it. And I've made this mistake probably more than anybody else in this room. And I've got the scar tissue to prove it. And I know that it's the case. And as we have tried to come up with a strategy and a vision for Apple, it started with what incredible benefits can we give to the customer? Where can we take the customer? Not starting with, let's sit down with the engineers and figure out what awesome technology we have, and then how are we going to market that. And I think that's the right path to take. I remember...
I think that's about it. So that was the final word. Thank you very much for being there.